Middleford, a town where time drifted like leaves on a gentle stream. A place where the days were long and the nights were peaceful. Children played in sun-dappled streets, their laughter ringing through the air like a sweet melody. Laughter echoed from cosy homes, filling the town with warmth and joy. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and baking bread, but the wind shifted, bringing with it an unfamiliar chill. A chill settled over Middleford. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. The sun seemed dimmer, the shadows longer, stretching ominously across the town. Flowers wilted prematurely, their vibrant colours fading into a dull grey, as if life itself was being drained away. Birdsong, once a symphony, dwindled to an unsettling silence. The cheerful chirping that once greeted the dawn was no more. The townsfolk at first dismissed these changes as mere whims of nature. They went about their daily lives, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. They continued their routines, their smiles strained, a growing unease in their hearts. Conversations became hushed and eyes darted nervously. The nights grew colder, the darkness deeper, wrapping the town in an eerie stillness. Sleep offered no solace, haunted by unsettling dreams. Nightmares of unknown terrors plagued the townspeople. Dreams of fire and shadow, whispers of forgotten fears. The darkness seemed to whisper secrets, long buried and best forgotten. The once vibrant heart of Middleford began to tremble, a creeping dread seeping into its soul. The town square, once bustling with life, now felt like a ghostly echo of its former self. One cool evening, a bonfire blazed at the edge of town. Its flames danced with an unnatural intensity, casting flickering shadows that twisted and writhed. The townsfolk, drawn by an unseen force, gathered around the fire. They stared into the flames, mesmerized, their faces illuminated by the dancing light. The fire crackled and hissed, its warmth seductive, its beauty hypnotic. It whispered promises of forgotten power, of primal desires fulfilled. The townsfolk, their faces flushed, their eyes glazed, felt a strange unity around the fire. They shared their fears, their anger, their growing despair. The fire seemed to drink in their words, its flames flaring higher, its heat intensifying. A subtle change crept over the townsfolk, their anxieties morphing into something darker, more sinister. The air grew thick with a palpable tension, as if the very atmosphere was suffused with an unseen malice. It was a heaviness that pressed down on the shoulders of every villager, making each breath feel laboured and each step a burden. Smiles became rare, replaced by suspicious glances and muttered accusations. Conversations that once flowed freely now stuttered and halted, choked by the growing mistrust that spread like a contagion. The once tight-knit community began to fray, unravelling thread by thread. Bonds that had been forged over years of shared experiences and mutual support were now strained to the breaking point. Arguments erupted over trivial matters, escalating with frightening speed. Disputes that would have once been resolved with a handshake or a laugh now ended in shouting matches and threats. Neighbours, once the best of friends, turned on each other with a venomous hatred. The warmth of camaraderie was replaced by the cold sting of betrayal. A farmer accused his neighbour of poisoning his well, a claim that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and toxic, further poisoning the already tainted atmosphere. A shopkeeper accused a customer of stealing a loaf of bread. The small, everyday transactions that once built trust now became battlegrounds of suspicion and resentment. Accusations flew like poisoned darts, finding their marks in the hearts of the townsfolk. Each word, each glance, each gesture seemed to carry a hidden barb, designed to wound and divide.
The fire at the edge of town burned brighter, fueled by the townsfolk's growing animosity. It was as if the flames themselves fed on the anger and distrust that now permeated Middleford. Its flames reflected in their eyes, now cold and hard, devoid of their former warmth. The firelight danced on their faces, highlighting the lines of worry and the shadows of fear. Middleford, once an idyllic haven, was slowly being consumed by an invisible fire, a fire that burned not with wood and flame, but with despair and rage. The village that had once been a symbol of peace and unity was now a battleground of suspicion and hostility, its spirit eroded by the relentless tide of animosity.
I've seen this before, long ago, in the stories whispered by the firelight. Tales passed down through generations, tales that were meant to be warnings, not just bedtime stories. Stories of the Ignus, a creature of fire and shadow, born from the ashes of despair. It is said to rise when the world is at its darkest, when hope is but a flicker in the hearts of men. It feeds on the negative emotions of mortals, growing stronger with each flicker of hatred, each ember of rage. The more anger and sorrow it consumes, the more powerful it becomes, an unstoppable force of destruction. It whispers to them in their dreams, amplifying their darkest desires, turning neighbor against neighbor. It sows seeds of discord, watching with glee as communities crumble from within. I tried to warn them, to remind them of the old stories, but my words fell on deaf ears. They laughed at me, called me mad, but I knew the truth. The Ignus was real, and it was coming. Their minds are clouded by the Ignus's influence, their hearts consumed by the fire that burns within. They no longer see reason, only the flames of their own anger and fear. They dismiss me as a senile old fool, but I know the truth. I've seen the signs, felt the heat of its presence. The Ignus is not just a story, it is a living nightmare. I can feel it in the air, taste it on my tongue. The bitterness of despair, the acrid tang of fear. These are the harbingers of the Ignus. The Ignus is near, and Middleford is its prey. This town, once peaceful and serene, is now a battleground for its malevolent influence.
Old Man Hemlock, his eyes clouded with wisdom and fear, watched the town descend into chaos. He had seen it all before, in the stories of old, and now those stories were coming to life before his very eyes. The Ignus, it was said, fed on the negative emotions of mortals, growing stronger with each flicker of hatred, each ember of rage. It thrived on the chaos it created, reveling in the destruction it wrought. Hemlock tried to warn the townsfolk, to remind them of the old stories, but his words fell on deaf ears. They were too consumed by their own fears and anger to listen to the ramblings of an old man. Their minds were clouded by the Ignus's influence, their hearts consumed by the fire that burned within. They could no longer see the truth, only the lies whispered to them in the dead of night. He was dismissed as a senile old fool, his warnings ignored, his fears dismissed. But Hemlock knew that the Ignus was real, and that it was only a matter of time before it consumed them all. But Hemlock knew the truth. He had seen the signs, felt the heat of its presence. The Ignus was not just a story, it was a living nightmare. He could feel it in the air, taste it on his tongue, the bitterness of despair, the acrid tang of fear. These were the harbingers of the Ignus. The Ignus was near, and Middleford was its prey. This town, once peaceful and serene, was now a battleground for its malevolent influence. Hemlock knew that if they did not act soon, the town would be lost to the flames forever. Little Ethan, a boy with eyes as blue as the summer sky, disappeared one evening. He had been playing near the edge of the woods, his laughter echoing through the trees. Then silence.
Ethan, where are you? Please, someone help find my boy.
The townsfolk, their fear and suspicion momentarily forgotten, searched for the boy. They scoured the woods, their calls echoing unanswered. As darkness fell, they stumbled upon a chilling sight. Ethan's toy soldier lay abandoned on the ground, partially melted, as if by intense heat. Near it, a small pile of ash, white, fine, and unnervingly human.
Echoing laughter.
A collective gasp of horror escaped the townsfolk. The truth, horrific and undeniable, settled over them like a shroud. The Ignus was real, and it had taken one of their own. Panic gripped Middleford. The whispers of the Ignus, once dismissed as mere legend, now echoed with terrifying reality. The townsfolk, their eyes wide with terror, looked to each other for answers, but found only reflections of their own fear. The fire at the edge of town, now a raging inferno, pulsed with an eerie light. It crackled and hissed, and in its depths they saw the shifting forms of faces they knew. Twisted, grotesque, consumed by a malevolent fire. The ground trembled, and from the heart of the inferno a figure began to rise. Tall and terrible, wreathed in flames that burned but did not consume. The Ignus had awakened. The Ignus towered over the terrified townsfolk, its eyes burning like hot coals. Its body, formed from smoke and shadow, crackled with an unholy energy. A wave of heat washed over the town, so intense that it felt as if the air itself would ignite.
Roaring. Your despair, your anger, your hatred. I speak of your darkest desires, your hidden shames. The fire that burns within you, a fire I have kindled, a fire I now control.
The townsfolk, their minds broken, their wills shattered, fell to their knees before the Ignus. They were puppets, dancing to the tune of their own destruction. Middleford, once a beacon of hope and happiness, was now a breeding ground for despair, a feast laid out for a demon's consumption.